Checkout tracking by the NPD Group brings you a receipt collecting system that gathers data anonymously through technology we created, providing your businesses with answers.
This next talk is one that I am exceedingly excited about because I have been begging for James Green to come speak for 3 years now. Back when I was in high school, there was this game called Herzog Zwei. Some consider it the first real-time strategy game, and I used to play the heck out of that game, and it was my big dream to someday make a spiritual successor. And James beat me to it. Today, he's going to tell us all about how he did it. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me warmly welcome to the stage CEO of Carbon Games, James Green.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, he definitely has been asking me over and over to come, and it's been hard because I feel like I'm outside of this world. This is the free-to-play, casual world, and he's like, no, but you're making a free-to-play game. You really should come and talk. So this year I finally relented, and I'm here to tell you the story of why we made AirMech free-to-play, how we started Carbon, and how I got where I am. And I hope it's not too disappointing because I look around at some of these other companies and what they do, I'm like, wow, they really thought that through. And we had very different motivations. And I'm going to run you through how we got where we are today. So what is AirMech? That's the first question I get because nobody hears anything about AirMech. We're a little indie dev, and marketing is hard. I'm sure many of you know that. Here's some pictures. This says, look, there's some little robots and little units and tanks running around. They blow stuff up, and it's like an Action-RTS, it's a little StarCraft, it's a little MOBA-like, and none of that really means anything. You see some pictures and you say, okay, oh, there's some pretty art. This is AirMech. I sort of see where you're going. And then they're like, well, actually, we don't know what that means. What actually is AirMech? So in words, AirMech is an action strategy game. I don't know how many fans here are more of came from the hardcore side, if you're StarCraft fans or anything. We're very old school gamers ourselves. We come from that side. We don't come from the casual side. It's more, we grew up playing Doom and StarCraft and the old RTS games. And that's what this is kind of in the spirit of. Scott referenced, Herzog Zwei, which I barely even will bring up because it's normally just blank stares that you get. But, we're going back in time like 22 years talking about our inspirations and games that we loved. And a lot of people like me, when I say the old school, been making games for 20 years crowd, we still rely on that. We rely on our Super Nintendo games and our Genesis games for where we started. So it led us to this point of making this game that is a pretty hardcore action RTS game. It's free to play, which if you told me I was going to make a free to play game even 5 years ago, I would have said you're crazy, and that's just never going to happen. But we've made it free to play. It's hardcore PvP. There's also cooperative modes, solo modes. We keep adding stuff that just appeals to the players. Watch and see what they like. We add more of that. We're on PC. We're on Steam. We still haven't launched fully. We're in early access. We're on Xbox 360. That was really an adventure getting a free-to-play game on Xbox 360. We're on Xbox One and PlayStation 4. We just launched those a couple months ago. It's been really exciting. We're currently working with one of the biggest Chinese publishers on the China localized version of the game. It's been really interesting. They're like, we have all this free-to-play experience, and we're going to help you make it more free-to-play-ish. And I'm like, yes, great, because we like making the games and want somebody else to help us with that part. And we've also got a mobile version that everybody keeps asking us where it is. But a small team, we just, we sort of focus on one thing at a time according to our own interests. So we self-published the game on Steam and PC. We just wanted total control. We want to be able to push out updates whenever we want. I was so jealous of everybody doing stuff on the app stores. It's total freedom. It's the opposite world that we're used to when you come from console and you're like, how do you deal with the publishers and TCRs and all this requirement? It's crazy. We're so jealous of being able to push a button and update things to your players and let the market decide if that's good or not. So we definitely wanted to control that ourselves on the PC side. For console, it's more complicated. We partnered with Ubisoft to launch those versions. We wanted somebody else to deal with Sony and Microsoft and fight with them over all the 20 TCRs we had to get waived in the end. China, of course, you can't just self-publish in China. You need a partner. So we took a long time. We actually took 2 years discussing with different partners and settling on one that we really liked. I'd say who it is, but they haven't officially announced it, so I don't want to, ruin that for them. So that'll be coming. We should be launching by the end of the year. So it's really exciting. So why did we choose to make AirMech? That's the other question I always get from people. They think that, oh, is there a special, like you see MOBAs are doing really well. Did you want to make something like that? Just say there's a missing, market. Oh, there's a perfect opportunity for this type of game right now. It's like, are publishers asking for it left and right? It's like, no, none of these things at all. It's purely a selfish thing that I wanted to make this game that I loved and had a ton of passion for. And it's the culmination of, I guess, 20 years of learning how to make games, and finally, I had the chance to do it. So a quick rundown on me, because my motivation really is the main reason why AirMech exists, like my inspiration in dragging this through with everybody else telling us no. So I grew up in Canada. I moved to the States, I moved to Texas, then I moved to Florida. I was in high school in Florida. And then it was 1993. 1993 was an amazing year for so many people I know in the game industry right now, my peers and everybody else, because that's when Doom shareware came out. And everybody's like, what is this thing? I can just put it in my computer for free. And this is important. It was free to play Doom. Like you weren't pirating it or anything. It was a shareware version. You got to play it for free, you got to play the first map, and it was great. It was transformative. Like people saw this for the first time running around in 3D, and it inspired a whole generation of really serious game developers. Then after you got over the shock of like, I can play this cool thing, you're like, oh wait, I can edit it too. I can actually start poking around and moving lines and making maps. And that's when it first dawned on me. It was in late high school that I was like, oh, I could potentially make games. Cool, this blew my mind. I still didn't know a path to actually becoming a game developer, but that opened Pandora's box of like, I can touch these things and I can start to do things. So back then I was like, oh yeah, I'll do college and I'll learn how to make games and stuff. But it was horrible, it was disgusting. Like I looked around for anything that would teach you computers, and it was like literally, here's different Photoshop filters effects and who can use the most of them in one thing. I was totally disgusted with it. So I said, I'm not taking any computer class in college. Instead, I just mucked around with physical media, and I got a traditional arts degree because I figured, why not? I might as well improve my core skills, and I taught myself everything else on the side. So I was, grabbing versions of engines, Quake, Unreal, it all came along. Pirating software, I will admit, just whatever I could to learn and teach myself how to make 3D things. And I would make things and put them out there on the internet, and people would use them for various projects. And one day, I saw I think it was Quake 2 when it got to that point. I was like, I love id. I want to work for id. This is my goal for sure. I need to work for id because I see what they're doing and I can do that too, or I can do better. That was my goal. But as fate would have it, Epic actually came to me and offered me a job. Well, that's the old logo. It's Epic Games. It was Epic Mega Games way back then. Epic came to me, and my first instinct was like, I really wanted to work for id. Epic is such second tier thing. I don't know. And then I came to my senses like, oh my God, I should jump on this. So I quit school and I moved up to North Carolina. I was just in love. I was in the industry. It was so amazing. Back then, Epic was like 20 people. We were working on Unreal Tournament. It was an amazing experience. So that was the perfect, how do you make a game with a small number of developers that are super passionate about just living at the office, just all they want to do is make games. Like that was super important to who I am as a developer. But as I wanted to do more stuff, I wanted to do bigger projects. And I ended up working for Ubisoft, and I went to China. And I worked on a couple Splinter Cell games. I helped out a lot of other games that Ubisoft was doing because they were trying to do them cheaply and in China. But I got this whole different view of the world. I got to see free-to-play sort of before it was free-to-play, because that's what was existing in China. It was mostly RPGs and stuff. But it was really eye-opening at the time. Even though I didn't want to make those games yet, China was way ahead of the curve on those things. So when I was there, working on Splinter Cell and everything else, I met my wife at the time. She's Chinese. She's given me an incredible insight into the gaming market that you don't get from other things. You read these summaries of like, oh, what is going on in China and what they're doing and what do they do in the cyber cafes. But if you need to speak to somebody who's actually there and actually playing stuff on the ground to get a real insight into how it works and what's going on. So she was an amazing source of inspiration to teach me about a lot of that stuff. But then I wanted to drag her back to the US. And we made a game called Tap Princess, which was a lot of fun. It was sort of my first attempt at making a game that was my own. I wanted to make something that was fun and fast-paced, and it didn't have to meet like the expectations of a first-person shooter or all these other games. It was very liberating. So that was the important part of saying, hey, you can completely make a game on your own, and it will do well. We went on to sell over 1 million units on PS3, just on PS3, which was really amazing for original IP. We had a ton of fun with it. So that has made me a pure game developer. I love just making games. Like I do a bit of biz dev stuff on the side, but primarily I work on the games. I'm still working on AirMech actively. I'm the lead developer. I've come from the console side, which is very much about optimization, and it's different than the mobile world. This is just as a reference of setting up why we're making AirMech. So lived in China, as I said, and we were fortunate enough to be able to start a new company. I know a lot of people, they're like, oh, I'm going to get some VC money, or I'm going to get a publisher deal, or all this stuff. I was fortunate enough to have enough saved away. I didn't have any debts, and I went in with my partner, and we said, hey, let's start a company. So we started Carbon Games with the intention that we just wanted to make a company that we loved. We'd been involved with things like, let's make a company and wrap it up into another company, and then we'll sell it, and this will IPO, and just all that nonsense. And I know that's a valid plan, I guess, for a lot of things, but we wanted to literally make a company we would never sell. We wanted to make a company that we just work at. We wanted to make our own company. That was very important to us. So then I also wanted to make a game. Selfishly, I wanted to make a game that I loved. So I wanted to make AirMech. As Scott referenced before, it was a game from my childhood. I loved it so much. There was no market justification for it. It doesn't make any sense. When I describe it to publishers, thankfully nobody wanted it, because if they had, who knows what would have happened. But I would describe this crazy thing using these old. That's why I stopped talking about Herzog's Why, because I find if you say, oh, it's a game from a long time ago, that shuts down so many things. It was unfortunate. But having this game that's multiplayer-faced and there's progression and unlocks, like you remember the old games where you would play and you would get awarded, here's some gems that you can then use to unlock something else. I'm not talking about free-to-play. I'm talking about Nintendo games and Genesis games. I mean, this was a standard thing. This was the design of the game that had nothing to do with free-to-play. So at some point, somebody said, oh, so you're going free-to-play with this, right? And I was like, no, I hate free-to-play. I don't want to do free-to-play. I mean, you'll find this with tons of core game developers. They're just anti-free-to-play inherently. But I started thinking about it more, and people would sort of pitch why it should be free-to-play. Oh, you get a lot more players. It's easy to build up your player base and get exposure. I was like, well, okay, I can see this. I actually can finally wrap my head around free-to-play and why it's a fair thing to do for users. So at a high level, it makes sense. Little did I know what I was getting into at the time, because I wanted to make. I see all these free-to-play games that I don't like. Like I said, I hated free-to-play, and there was a reason for that. It was all the examples of games that I didn't like. So I don't want to do those. I mean, I was very firm. I was like, okay, I'm going to make the good, fair version of free-to-play. I'm in the position to do so. I'm gambling my own money. Why not? So this is one of the things I really hated about free-to-play games. I mean, I'm sure you see these curves all over the place, but they generally look like this. You've got your 5% payers, and then it just spikes up to whales. And people are like, yeah, that's a good, healthy free-to-play curve. That's what you want. Like, that's what all games get. I'm like, no. I think that's terrible. I don't think that's a fair way to do free-to-play. Like, I think it should function more like a demo. Like, I think that you should let the players play, and if they don't like the game, that's fine. So here's what I wanted to see. This is the nice little curve that I wanted to do. I wanted to say, like, oh, if you don't like the game at all, fine, you play for a bit, and then you don't pay because you didn't like it. In my mind, I didn't realize there's people that can like your game but also not pay. That was a huge oversight. But this is really what I wanted. I was like, oh, well, X person, makes, a little bit of money, so that you want them to buy in, at this point, and then somebody else has more disposable income. Okay, fine, they can spend more. I'm comfortable with that. But after operating this game for a few years, I can for sure tell you that, despite your best intentions, your curve is gonna look like this. Like, it actually looks like that no matter what you're making. And it really shocked me for a while, because we keep changing things and you'd still get the whales. Like, there's still these whales that would spend, a lot. They spend, I don't want to say how much they spend, because I love that they do. I mean, it's a huge affirmation and vote of like, I like what you're doing, but I still feel it's not fair. So it's led me to a theory that I wanted to share about, the people that will pay in your game. When people say, oh, you make a very different type of game, you're going to get a different percentage of the people that will pay or not pay or pay a lot. I think the percentage is pretty constant across a lot of games, but you'll get different people. Like, it's like you squeeze players here and they move over somewhere else. Like, I know for sure, because they reach out to us, sometimes and politely ask for things, that our whales are really nice people that spend on things because they like to give back to the community and they're generous. We don't get whales that pay for power and to destroy other people, because you don't have that path in our game. I'm sure if we changed it so you did, we would get whales that are paying for tons of power. And at the same time, the people that pay out of compassion and because they like what we're doing and they think we're fair, those people would go away. So you just move where they are, and your percentages will probably look the same, because it's amazing to me how close our graphs are to every other free-to-play game that I've seen out there. It's that surprised me. We had no experience starting this, but that was definitely something that was shocking. So back to some of the actual lessons about what I've learned so far. Now, we're not done. We're 4 years into it, but we're far from done. But I want to share some of the things that might be different from the other space that's shared, because you don't really see this stuff for League of Legends or the mega games. So when you're an indie, when you're a small indie, it is really, really harder than you think. Maybe you guys know it already, and I just was naive. It is really hard to make headway with the hardcore crowd, because their tastes and expectations for games is very, very high. They have very high standards. They expect the world. They're not just browsing lists to get whatever the hottest game is. They will ask their friends what they're playing, and they're very selective about it. There's this agreement of like, yes, League of Legends is the game that we're playing. It's like, oh, or no, it's Dota we're playing. It's like, but they sort of hone in on that. So when you just say, oh, you just put a good game out there that's fair, they don't just show up. I mean, it was really hard at first. We'd go to PAX, we'd go to shows, we'd try to get players into the game. That wasn't terribly effective. We found that just organic word of mouth over time was more the way to do it. Then we launched on Steam into early access. Now that's a nice way to get a bunch of users. Users will flow in through Steam, just being on Steam. But you're also competing with every other free-to-play game that's out there. Now, we have lots of players who are like, oh, you guys are great, we love you, you're the best free-to-play game on Steam, whatever, lip service, they just like to say this stuff. Because there's a lot of bad free-to-play games on Steam. Like, they're just for simple ports of Chinese games that aren't really suited to the market. But the sad fact is you're competing against some really, really great games. You're competing against Dota 2, which doesn't lock things away. It gives you everything for free. So you've got super high production quality, pushed by Valve. Everybody's playing it. How do you make headway into that? It's really hard, especially in the PvP space. If I had to go back, I'd maybe do more PvE focus instead. But if you're doing PvP, it is really, really hard to compete with the top games. Like, I just listed the top 3 there, and it just drops off, like rapidly after that. I mean, everybody's playing Valve's games, and it's very hard to compete with them in terms of polish, because they don't really forgive you for being an indie. Nobody really cares. So they've made it hard indirectly. By being awesome and being true to themselves, they've made it harder for others. But that's okay. So if you're making a traditional, like, very indie game with pixel art, I see a lot of people that they don't sell that many copies, but because they're actually selling copies, it does well for them. You know, you can do well in the indie space. You can carve out something and say, oh, you know, people they like us. They have their little mega group of fans. You got it on Humble Bundle. You've got a lot of options to sell your game, even at a cheap price. And then I asked them how many people are playing their game. Oh, like nobody's playing our game. Like the very, very small numbers. And I look at our numbers like a lot more people are playing our game, but we don't have the revenue of even these other little tiny indie games. And so that was kind of frustrating. You need to have a very, very large hit, you know, in free to play. Same as mobile. I mean, you need to have huge numbers. It's a lot harder on PC, I think, than on mobile, just because of the install base. So, as I was saying, if you're indie, it doesn't give you any points in the free to play space. Like that's one market where they just don't care. They hold you up to Dota 2, League of Legends, like, oh, it's pretty good, but you know, I expect this level of polish and this level of service and all these things, and that makes it really, really hard. So you say, okay, forget about Steam, just Wild West PC. People are like, oh, you can buy users and stuff, right? It's like, no, I don't even know how to buy users for one thing on PC. It's very hard to find places that will dedicatedly give you PC users. And anytime we get somebody who wants to give us numbers, it just doesn't make sense to us. They're like, oh, you know, it's like $3 or $4 or $5 per user. I'm like, our users don't generate that much. So we're not in a position where we can even buy users. So we have a steady stream of organic growth there, but it's much smaller than I would like it to be. So here's some numbers, just putting them together that say, like, that backs up the stuff that I'm saying. You know, our conversion is, you know, around 5%. It's gone up over the years as we've made the game better. Maybe it's like 6 or 7%, depending on what the month is and what the promotions are, but let's just call it 5%. The long-term retention is not good. That's a big problem with the game. So people love it and they play it. We see they mostly don't play PvP. I don't know if it's because it's an RTS, but they don't really gravitate towards PvP. They like to play co-op, they like to play solo, and they finish the content because it wasn't designed for that. They just sort of do that for practice, and then they finish that and they move on. So they love the game, they give it a good review, and everything's great, but they finish the game and they move on. So that definitely creates a problem because, as you guys all know, you know, the revenue per player is very predictable. Like, it's very even. Like, we can look at any point in time and say, like, oh, there's this many players in game. They ended up spending this much on average. That also shocked me how steady that was, that it just works out. Because when you come from the console space, you're worried about monetizing every single player. You need to be able to step back and say, oh, there's just a total amount of money that comes from this many players, and it's okay that a lot of them don't monetize. So we're still getting 1,000 players a day. And on average, we see 15 cents average revenue per daily active user. Console has a lot more players. Due to the deal with Ubisoft, I can't really talk about the numbers with that. And it's doing well, and that could, you know, add to things. I like to focus on PC because I figure that's something that, you know, we can experiment with more and will benefit us more if it does well. So the other thing is that we're still in early access. I don't know if y'all know what early access is on Steam. It's where you're sort of in a beta stage and you haven't done your official launch yet. We view that as our soft launch, so we continue to make sometimes rather large changes to the game. But they don't, we don't burn our big promotion with Valve. Valve is like, they've said, you know, we will give you a lot of promotion when you're ready. We want to make sure that the retention numbers, if we can get them to where we want before we do that. Because otherwise, you know, we'll get, you know, hundreds of thousands of users and then just burn through them and it'll be done. We don't want to do that, and we're not forced to exit right now, so we're staying in early access until we get it where we want, because we don't want to blow it. So I would strongly advise against making a hardcore free-to-play unless you really know what you're doing. It's much harder than I thought, and I haven't seen a lot of small teams be in a position where they can handle it or market the games as they need. I mean, the last big indie game I thought was like Warframe is probably the last indie free-to-play game, and before that, League of Legends, I also sort of count as indie. I mean, they start up from nothing, because now you're competing with Valve and Blizzard and everybody else. It's a brutal market for hardcore. So I would make a totally different game. I mean, I would actually make AirMech, but differently if I had to do it over again. So, as I said, these are in the slides so that, it's just a recap of it. Retention is not where we want it to be. Core players don't like not having another FPS. They say, oh, we want something different, but actually they don't. They want something like, they like first-person shooters and stuff, because they're good at them instantly. It's hard for us to get people past that learning curve. So we built everything ourselves, which it was a lot of work. It took a lot of time, custom engine, custom backend. But the good thing are, in the end, that the players love us, so it's very satisfying. So we have a different game that we like, and it's not like it's not a failure or anything. It hasn't even launched yet. It's just not going as I thought it would go, as I'd hoped. I was like, oh, we'll scale up and have a big team and do more and more. It's been a long time, to get where we are, but it's been a lot of fun. So I keep saying that, if you can get to a point where you can work on your retention numbers and they do well, anything will work if you've got more and more players. So that's the one thing. If you can get a lot of players and stay in your game, well, you guys know this. Like, it doesn't matter if you're making pennies, it would still work. So that's always something for us to continue with. So yeah, sorry, I keep hammering retention. That's a focus thing that we're doing right now. So if you can do retention, that's the magic trick to any of these games. But we love it. We love it. I love what AirMech is, and as Scott can attest to, it feels great to make something that you love, even if it's not where you want it to be. So, and that's about it. I'll just cut it off there. I was just going to talk about next stuff, but.
So you're saying don't do hardcore free-to-play?
No, I would
Please
say,
don't tell our investors at Ignited Artists that you said that. Ladies and gentlemen, the one, the only, the awesome James Green.